Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Valhalla Movement Podcast, where we're diving deep. We're diving deep into everything that is the farm, everything that it is, a bunch of stuff that's going on. Now, if you're watching this episode, you know that I've already brought a good friend, somebody who I've been working with now for, I want to say like a year, P.O. Bouchard, who is kind of the lead master planner of Valhalla at this point. I mean, I think kind of I have that title in some ways, but I have far from the skills that you have. So first of all, thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure. It's an honor.
Yeah. So, I mean, Peo and I, just for some background context for, those of us who maybe didn't watch the last episode that we did with Jean-Martin Fortier, or who maybe don't know that we've been dealing with all kinds of different challenges with the city, the CPTRQ, CPTRQ being the government body that governs farmland in Quebec, here in Canada. We've just been dealing with a bunch of different challenges and a bunch of different potential infractions where they can fine us and a bunch of other stuff. And we have a lot of updates. But the interesting thing, and the reason I wanted to have Peo on, is number one, he, more than anybody, actually knows kind of the future of the farm from a design perspective and a planning perspective and a lot of the different things that go into that. But he's also witnessed and was there at all the meetings that I had with the city. Mm-hmm. So you have a less biased view of how those meetings went, how these different things played out. So before we dive into any of that, I just want to hear a little bit about you, your background, a little bit about your story. For those who are watching this and don't know who you are, just give us a little bit of context. How do we meet, what you're passionate about, and how we started working together.
Yeah. Well, I try to be a bit short because it could discuss last a long time. But basically, I'm from Quebec City. I've been an architect since officially at the board of the architects since 2011, and I've been working in different firms in Quebec and came in Montreal around 6 years ago on this kind of personal growth path, the necessity to kind of give a different direction to my life. And I came here, and it was a very like linear path, like the very big, like just regular guy. And about 4 years ago, I kind of went into like I went to recognize that I had some patterns and that my life was maybe not going in the direction I wanted it to go. Mm-hmm. So I kind of embarked on this more personal journey. And this led me to go to attend some festival, like Conscious Festival, for lack of better names. Mm-hmm. And it was during the summer of 2021 that I met a guy named Charo. Mm-hmm. And basically, this guy invited me to the first event of a new thing, which were men's circles. Mm-hmm. And so I was really happy to be part of this the first edition, let's say, of that very privileged event. And this happened to be hosted at your farm, mm-hmm. which I never heard about before, mm-hmm. and I've never had really any specific interest into the farmland, let's say, or agriculture itself mm-hmm. before. But as soon as I put my feet at the Valhalla farm and I saw you, I saw like the people who were actually, hosting the event, and also just the community behind it, like that was supporting the whole farm. Mm-hmm. And I could feel something that was very triggering to me. So I was like, hey, so what is it? Like, what triggers me here? Mm. And I guess it was both, connection with men. Mm-hmm. Although Valhalla is not only men, but like at this specific event, it was connection with nature, mm-hmm. and also just a place to be yourself and to be able to speak and to feel like it's a non-judgmental place. Mm-hmm. And I kind of feel like, so I went through this first men's circle, not having a clear vision of where it would lead me or how I would act on this thing that had just opened in front of me, right? Mm-hmm. But then I left Quebec for about 6 months. Mm-hmm. And even before that, I had this vision where I was like, well, I kind of feel like we need space for men to gather, so I started building this like board, which I called it was a brotherhood sanctuary at this stage. I never showed you that first document.
You never showed me that.
But I had like a few slides of like what I had in my mind, but I think it just stayed on the shelf went on this 6-month travel, and I can clearly remember that when I was traveling, I was in Mexico and Latin America, and I was thinking about the farm and you many times, and I was like, I need to be part of this. I want to be part of this. I don't want to be just some participant that just goes there once in a while and participate and then go back. I kind of feel like I want a higher level of implication. But I did and I was like, patience is a virtue. Be patient. Have some more clarity around how you can help or what you want to do, where you want to go with your life. And then it might happen. And then when I came back, it was pretty much a year ago. It was the beginning of June. I remember. And this is when you knocked on my door and say, hell, well, I think we are at a stage now where we need to have a clearer vision and to really start mapping things out at the farm. Because you are a guy, so you have this farm, you have your agency, you have those class online, you have this academy you had, and it's very impressive when we don't know you, when we get to the farm and you talk about, and you do storytelling, and then when you talk about your story, it's very impressive for most people who are not entrepreneurs, very active like you are, right? And so I was a bit, I guess, intimidated by what you were incarnating, let's say. Can I say that? Yeah. And so I was like, I don't want to be this needy guy who comes to this guy saying, you have something I don't have. I don't know what that is, but I want to find out through you. So I kind of waited until things will align naturally, let's say, at some point.
Sure.
And so so you reach out. So we were in contact a little bit. I was following Valhalla movement and with everything at a farm from a distance. And when I came back, we reunited, let's say, and for the first time we were like, okay, how can we work together? This is how it all started.
Yeah.
And we're here today, like a year later, with a lot of work done.
Definitely.
A lot of learnings.
Definitely.
And still a lot of gray zones.
A lot more to do. Absolutely.
Right. So that's a bit of the backstory here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I thank you for sharing the story and actually the true emotions behind it. I mean, around, obviously showing up at the farm. The first event, ironically, was at that event, we were physically, we gathered some of the guys and we're like, look, guys, we have a bunch of post and beams that we have to put up, and they're really freaking heavy, and we really could use some help. And we lined it up so that you guys could all kind of support us in that thing. And I remember seeing you and your energy and just and understanding you were an architect, but also understanding you had to spend a little bit of time working with Solution Era, which focuses on ecological design. You had kind of gone down that rabbit hole. And you were almost like a dissociated architect from let's say the way that architecture is happening today. And so I just kind of I felt immediately, I was like, okay, I know I'm going to work with this guy. I know that this guy is going to help me. Because the truth is, as maybe impressive my career might be over what is now the beginning of my 17th year as an entrepreneur, I'm not as organized as you. I'm not as meticulous as you. I'm not as I'm more I'm more the type of person who takes risk, let's say, and I'm willing to kind of push the edges. And I've always, in my entire life, I've always had somebody who's a little bit more centered, a little bit more organized, and a little bit more well, wait a second, Mark, this is the process. This is the right way to do it. Let's go about it properly. Let's map, let's plan, let's, do the legal together. And that for me came from my father, right? He was a lawyer, tax lawyer, and entertainment lawyer, and a bunch of stuff. So he's always kind of been that pillar in my life. But realistically, Valhalla was and is growing, but at that time was growing immensely. And it was starting to get to the point where it's okay, there's a lot of people here. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot more money going into this, both out of my pocket, but also just from the community. We're clearly going to the point of building a farm venue, a place not only where we're growing, but we have infrastructure to grow, but also infrastructure to host, infrastructure where people can come and participate in agritourism. There was a lot of people asking us for tours, a lot of people asking different questions. And so it was starting to kind of mushroom. And now we were getting to the point where my lack of planning and my lack of having a master plan when you consider building a farm, building if you were doing a traditional real estate project, if you're building infrastructure, you want to have a master plan. And I had none of that. I had a vision,
right,
to some degree. I had some clarity around certain things. But honestly, I don't think that I get nearly as far as we are today without you.
Well, thanks for sharing as well. It's the first time we discussed about the first time we saw each other, actually, which is very interesting.
It's true.
And yes, well, you know, I kind of feel like I'm more someone who, as you mentioned, is capable of understanding what's in your head and kind of classify it into different kind of categories and try to bring. So what's in your head can be clear for yourself, but it can be messy for people from the outside.
Which is a massive problem. It was a bottleneck, without a doubt, in Valhalla's existence, and in its potential to scale, it absolutely needed a proper map, and it needed a dynamic between somebody like me and somebody like you to put that on digital paper. Let's say, yeah.
Because I see myself more like someone who's using my architect skills and experience and transpose it on something called, and I'm an urban designer as well. So I've been urban designer. So right now it's kind of funny because when people ask me, what do I do? I'm like, oh, I'm like a rural designer. What is that? It's like, I'm like doing urban design, but I'm just applying my capabilities to rural regions and agriculture, you know?
Yeah.
And, but still I'm like, yes, as you mentioned, I was interested in ecological buildings and like passive greenhouses on buildings and that kind of stuff. But I'm not like, I was not the guy reading like Jean-Martin Fortier's book, for example. So that's why I'm here with humility saying, well, I'm good at taking what's in your head and bringing collect that and transpose that into drawings. But at the same time, I'm not like a farming designer, let's say.
Absolutely.
So I've learned a lot about what are beds, what are how do you modulate dimensions of farmland, like how to make it efficient, like all those things I've been learning. But so part of my, I guess my role with you is to get your ideas organized and to draw them on a paper so you can actually have a visual thing of what you have in your mind, and then you can show to other people at the farm, for example.
Yep.
And so this also creates some momentum to the community because every member of the farm can then have a better vision of where we're going, which is very more maybe stimulating than, although you're very good at storytelling and you're very good at telling the story to the people.
I'm good at seeding. I'm a phenomenal, like in the world of farming, I'm really good at starting things, but in the world of entrepreneurship and storytelling, I'm really good at starting things too. But that doesn't mean I'm great necessarily at managing them or going through all the different stages of it, right? Like I'm good at having a vision, but I'm horrible at necessarily communicating it sometimes in full. Right. Meaning I'm good at like getting somebody to feel like initiated and feel like, okay, I get it. I understand why you're going in this direction. I feel a connection to it. I want to participate in it. But I think a lot of people, if I were to criticize myself, a lot of people need the map. They need the like, okay, oh, this is going here. Why is that going there? Oh, okay. Oh, wow, I can maybe get involved in this thing because you guys are planning on going in that direction. And a lot of it realistically comes out of the organic process and the chaos of the people who just show up, right? Like a lot of these projects, a lot of these different things, even my knowledge of how to plan a farm or all these different things was very poor for many of the first years of Valhalla, and only today am I feeling like we're actually ahead of the curve.
Right.
And that was important from two very, very, very crucial elements of us building this farm. The first is the people at the farm, right? The people who come to the farm, the members of the farm, the people supporting the farm on a day-to-day basis and or on a here and there basis. And just being able to show that is literally life-changing. Like I cannot stress enough that my experience working with you and collaborating with you and designing documents like this with you has been incredibly impactful for everyone at the farm, and also for everyone to have trust in the process and in the plan of the farm. So the gift that you're giving me, although I'm the guy who, got the farm to this point and was even the guy who found you and said, okay, let's work together, and who can be humble enough to realize like, oh, I'm good at certain things, but I'm really not good at this thing. That was one thing. And then that's one stakeholder, let's say, that's super important. But then there's the whole legal regulation, city, municipal, and provincial, and even possibly federal laws that essentially govern everything we can and cannot do at the farm. Right. And your meticulous nature of like, okay, I'm going to go through what they call the grille, which is like, here's specifically what you can and cannot do, all the different things, as well as just receive like, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. We're going to have power. We're going to have water. We're going to, and you're like, okay, well, wait a second, Mark. We have to go and like make a little bit of a map of what the mission and vision is. We have to make a little bit of a map of, some of the inspirations that we have, and also start making a bit of a mind map of like how and where do all of these things start to kind of come together. So this really is your genius on display. It's what's in my mind, but your ability to map it, to also like start color coding it and like kind of bring that layer and that consistency of that layer. I understand that. I've never been an architect. I've never, but I had a brief 2-3 year period of time where I was actually trying to start an architectural firm and a design firm. So I did learn a lot about it, and I think that definitely supported me in my discussions with you. But where I understand this the most is when I was designing brands and websites, right? Like part of storytelling that I've been a part of for many years was, oh, okay, we have this product or this idea and this brand, and now we have to communicate this brand consistently online. And so when I think about that, I think about like, oh, we have to have a logo. We have to have a primary color and accent color. We have to communicate in this particular way. We have to do the research on the back end. We have to have this on the website, this on the, like, these are all the things that I know go into building, let's say, the house that is a brand. And from your perspective, you're doing that exact same thing when it comes to master planning, when it comes to architecture, which I think drastically, it made me realize like, oh, I get what you're like. I really get you. Right. And we're doing the same thing, just you're in the construction world, let's say, or in the physical world, and I was in the digital world. But ironically, I was also in the physical world of the actual farm, and then you were in the digital world of like making renders and making plans and making these different things.
Yeah,
so it's also a marriage of awesome talents.
Yeah, but and I kind of feel like also this is a must go through step just to bring clarity to myself, because I'm not in your head, so I need to kind of. It's trials and errors until I find a way to, okay, this mind map is what you have in your mind. And then we start from the same page,
Yeah.
And it's also like you were
this is an abbreviated version of it, really.
Well, yeah, of course. Because that's what I was about to say, because there's always like the components, or that you have kind of clarity in your mind around where you want to go. But then as you mentioned, like Valhalla community is like a community of entrepreneurs as well. So every single one of them have their own ideas as well. And so it just creates this kind of big cloud of many ideas.
Yep.
And so there's like, I would say like more stable pieces.
Yep.
And they're always moving pieces.
Yes.
And in architecture, we talk about like the technical and functional program. So normally before going through any building drawing or any master plan, you will go through, okay, what are the needs?
Yes.
And what are really necessities, and what are nice to have, and what do you need now, and what do you need like in like midterm, and what do you need like in long term, right?
Yep.
And I kind of feel like you had some of those answers, but some of them you didn't have them.
Yeah.
And so I think this kind of mind map, let's say, or categories, also brings the opportunity for you to like a mirror. Like I'm acting a bit like a mirror for you. Okay, so these are the
100%.
ideas. I kind of felt like they were. It was like it was very like, okay, we're going that direction, and then not so much.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so yeah, I kind of feel like for me it's really like a collaborative process. Like I don't feel like I've overtaken. Like I wouldn't consider myself like as a lead designer. I consider myself as like more like a right arm in regard of transposing the vision and communicate it to the people who needs to see it, to hear it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I mean, you've done a phenomenal job of making that happen. I mean, if I just kind of continue through this process here, showing the different elements of agricultural, community, and agritourism all kind of merging into one, into this one space.
But that's interesting because this you had already. So this was from your website. I took most of this from your bigger vision already. So I just mapped it. But then it creates a great starting point to organize stuff afterwards.
But that's the whole point, is that like I'm the kind of guy who like moves so fast that the paperwork and the plans, I'm like, oh no, it's super clear, everyone understands. And then I realized, like, actually, like, nobody understands. And no matter how obvious I think things are, this happens in everything I've ever, when I was working more in marketing and production of like making content and those different things. Obviously, I'm still doing it now just for myself in this way particularly. But when I was doing more of that, I realized, like, no, everyone needs absolutely like so goddamn clear instructions and roadmaps and whatever. And I just never had I guess I never had the counterpart who could help me map that. If that makes sense. Like, nobody can ever receive all the things that I was thinking about and like start to really meticulously, continuously make it clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer. So, it really started to lead to, some of these different designs who are the ecosystem of people that we're inspired by and the different government bodies. What is our vision for the project, or, a little bit of the history of it, where it is, some of the land that we're considering buying next door, what that might expand to look like. What are the regulatory context pieces of the farm? Like, this is all your work. Now, in fairness, I had some of these answers.
Of course.
Like, I had already told you, like, okay, we're in this zone with this thing. Here's a grille. No. Like, I had done some of it, but to list it all in one place and to be able to show it all and to categorize it all, I think changed a lot. And so these designs, just so you guys know, this is all done with the collaborative effort that Pio and I have been putting together, and we're more and more and more we're mapping. Okay, like, where are the water lines? How are they traveling? Where are the power lines that are either above ground or below ground? Where is the different buildings? What are they doing? What is growing in these different areas? How are we planning on putting in the house and different things like that? And where's the septic system maybe going to go? And already we have an update to these, right? Like, these are some of kind of later versions. We have things about the house and different look and feel. By the way, that particular house is far from the look and feel of the design. But just learning more and more and more about also direction. And I think that's where we can get to. But before we go further into like the future of the farm and the direction of the farm, I think that there's an important story about our journey, because you kind of came in a few months before I basically got a letter saying, or multiple letters. I got served quite literally at the farm by, I don't know if you call it a bailiff or whatever it is, but who basically said, hey, you guys are like committing a bunch of infractions on the farm, meaning you're doing things that are not in conformity to the rules and regulations of the city and the rules and regulations of the CPTAQ, which is, again, the government body that governs farmland in Quebec. Their job is to protect farmland in Quebec. So with that said, though, it really just, like, for me, it felt like divine timing. That's like, okay, well, actually, we've already started mapping everything. We're already working on the mind maps. We're already working on all these different things. And then I believe it was in July, I get served these papers saying, okay, you've got 15 things on the property that, like, we're concerned about, and that are basically existential. I mean, we're talking, you have buses on the property that people are living in, you're not allowed to have. You guys have, like, everything from, like, the siding of this building is maybe in question, or it shouldn't be conform, or like, you guys built a road that you're not supposed to have put, or blah, 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 blah. Like, I mean, it was in every direction that all of a sudden the entire existence and the growth of the farm that was going so well, now all of a sudden was, like, put into chaos, and also basically scaring some of the people who are there every day at the farm, who are living in those buses, who are kind of supporting the farm as farmers and as hired help, or as volunteer help on a regular basis. So I'm curious about your perspective, because you were there in the meetings with us at the city, your perspective of the evolution of the conversation that has started to evolve, where in a way it kind of felt like the government was the enemy, and like there were roadblocks. And I would still say that in certain cases, the bureaucracy or the red tape of the government still is kind of a challenge, to now where, well, I'll just say things are improving. But I'm curious about, like, your experience, your take without my, let's say, bias of how I think it went, of some of the meetings that we've had with the city, and maybe what's going on in the extremely complex web of trying to even understand what you can or cannot do on farmland.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think like I think the most number one function of like the municipality we work with is to apply a law. Like there's a system of laws which already exist, and they just have no choice to apply that. So that's the way they are the bad guys. Like they're just trying to see where you're making infractions, and then they send exactly.
Yeah.
But then there's the people behind those laws who are working every day at the city and that understand the common sense or the way things needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like a duality in those organizations.
Yep.
So when we sat down the first time at the municipality, like the actual chief of the chef de direction was actually there with us, smiling and mostly being really motivated to help us out to be able to keep growing this disruptive model without being too much disruptive.
Yep.
So it's like, well, this is how laws are right now. This is where you're going. And basically, they will never say it that way. But basically, it's you're going forward too fast for us. and we are the municipality. And then there's above us, there's the MRC, which is the Municipalité Régionale de Comté, which is like a group of municipalities.
Yep.
And then you have like le ministère des... c'est quoi? C'est le ministère des Affaires. How's it called again? Anyway, there's like this other ministry, like provincial,
Yep.
and then you have the federal as well.
Yep.
And then you have other stuff like more about let's say not about
specific to farming,
exactly,
or specific
which are different.
Yeah.
So I guess they feel like their hands are tied. Like they are at the bottom level. They want to help you out, but at the same time they need to make sure that the laws are applied. So I kind of my personal experience from those meetings was positive.
Yes.
Because I feel like they understand what we are trying to do. And yeah, I don't know. And
well, they understood. So what I felt was phenomenal is that it was all in goodwill.
Of course.
Both us showing up and saying, look, guys, like we understand that we're a little disruptive, and we understand we're a little bit different, and we understand we're not the traditional farm. And we also understand, or at least after the first meeting that I had with them, and this is, I say first meeting in this context after receiving the infractions. I hadn't spoken to them in quite some time, but I had met them, particularly this one person, multiple times over years of, getting a bunch of stuff happening at the farm. But that being said, the other thing that really plays out is that these people don't understand farming or don't necessarily understand small-scale farming, and so they don't have any context to know why or why not we were doing certain things. Like, for example, right, we had this whole discussion about wood chips. Right. So let's talk about wood chips for half a second. There's a bunch of people who clean up trees called arborists that essentially, the trees hit power lines, they cause problems, they can, cause power outages, or they're a danger, blah, 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 blah. Well, there's a bunch of people who go and chop down dead trees or trees that are hitting power lines, doing all this stuff. And normally they would go physically to a dump and have to pay to dump that in some landfill. And that is a carbon sink, that is, a carbon... carbon-inducing process, because essentially you're not letting that break down in a very natural way. It possibly can create other, greenhouse gases, different things like that, okay? Long story short, they started finding out that they can come and quote-unquote dump or bring the wood chips to our farm, and the wood chips are acting as a soil remediation for our farm. One, it helps us make pathways and delineate where plants are planted and where people can walk. So kind of a diversity between humans and, let's say, and plant life or biological life in that way. But also it breaks down over time into compost or into black earth, essentially, that inherently supports the growth of our farm. But from their perspective, they were like, well, wait a second. Like, why are you guys dumping a bunch of wood chips here? It's like, are you just creating a big fire hazard? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like all these different things that inherently they don't understand. And so now all of a sudden we're in this gap where they're saying, well, we don't have rules for this, or we don't know what the rules are for this. And when we ask questions like, well, okay, well, we would love to have a pond, they're like, they're kind of dumbfounded. And I don't blame them. This is not a slander of them, because they don't even know where necessarily to turn to be like, okay, well, whose jurisdiction does this fall under? It's on farmland, so it's under the CPTRQ, but it's also in our city, so it's under us. But it's also a bassin, so maybe it's under the Quebec government and this department or this environmental department. Blah, blah. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But if it touches an existing waterbed or source, then it's maybe this or then. And then all of a sudden, it's like, man, if they can't even know, and they would take like, and we asked, for example, about digging a pond multiple times and multiple occasions, saying like, look, we're waiting, but we really need to do this because we're literally right now digging the pond, and literally right now in the middle of a sécheresse or a drought, or at least what could be. Well, I would say that we're dry. We're very dry. But so a drought from the perspective of our plants want more water, and I don't want to tap our well all the time, and we're not supposed to. Well, I don't know. I don't even know what we're supposed to or not supposed to do. Long story short, though, is that we need this pond to essentially be at a minimum a backup water source for us, okay? But they don't know. And so it's like, how is it possible that we as a community, myself as a farmer, how are we supposed to move forward? Mm-hmm. And if every question that we have requires a 3-month delay in response, it completely changes the game. Now, here's the other thing that happened to us that is a very powerful contextual thing. We received avis from the city and the CPTRQ saying, hey, you are doing things that you're not supposed to be doing. Like, you're not supposed to be doing tours at the farm. You're not supposed to be hosting farm table dinners or events. You're not supposed to be doing blah, 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 blah. And then from the time that they gave us the avis to the time that we were eventually going to like have to answer the avis, I think it was a 60-day window or whatever it was, the Quebec government had to release new rules saying, by the way, half the stuff that you guys are doing that we said you couldn't be doing, now you could be doing.
Right.
And when we went to the city, they were like, wait a second, how does this guy know about all these new rules? We haven't even received a report on this. Like, we know nothing about these new rules. Fascinating.
Yes.
Right? Because government isn't just this one person, this super well-oiled, coordinated machine. I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But many of the different aspects of government are working in little silos, and slowly but surely the information tries to transfer between them. But
it does take time.
But it takes an enormous amount of time. And every new law and every new thing, like, the director at the city was saying, hey, these are the rules right now, but come back and we're currently rewriting them. So I can give you this answer today, but by the time you're actually going to do it, the laws might be different. It's like, man, for me, it sometimes feels incredibly defeating. I mean, do you ever experience that? Like, is that
never as much as this? Never as much as this.
Yeah.
No, because most of the time, like the let's say you're working with a real estate developer, you're working with a client. Who has this project in mind, let's say whatever, like residential, commercial project. He will try to most of the time they will try to develop their project within the limits of the law.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes they will push a little bit, but they will go through normal processes to get some changes, like most of the time minor changes, sometimes more major changes, and these take more time. But it's not like if the path was unknown to where are we going? Okay, we're going to get,
and who do we speak
it's
to?
Either like A process or B process, and we're going to get there because we stay in the, let's say, the legal ecosystem that we know.
Yeah.
But we're in a place where like there's just blank zones.
Yeah.
Around what is farming and agriculture.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because I kind of feel like the actual municipality we're working with, they are overflow. Like they have too much work. They feel like, but I kind of feel like this is the situation regarding more urban development.
Yes.
While about at least 90% of the total area of the municipality is just agriculture.
Yes.
So this makes me think about should this be two different kind of, like, should they be two different departments,
Yes.
or like one big department? But I don't know. There's something in the process, like in this quest for information and trying to push forward and just develop the farm, that we don't feel supported.
But it seems like nobody knows this information. Like, even when I call the UPA and I'm like, hey, do I have a representative? I'm part of this union. Do I have a representative I can speak to? And they're like, well, not really. We don't really know, or ask questions about certain things. They have no freaking idea. I feel like it's constantly a game of like, I literally don't know who to talk to. And it's not like I don't want to be acting in good faith, but it's like you're making it impossible for me as a farmer and as a business owner and as an entrepreneur to essentially move forward. And so at some point that creates, and this is where my the good and the bad and the ugly to some degree of what I do is I just move. I'm like, forget it. We're just going. We're doing it. And and that really just kind of pushes the agenda forward. It's like, even with the pond, they're like, okay, well, actually, there's no real laws that apply to this. There's no maximum depth. But if you're touching an existing ruisseau, then technically whatever. But then even the other day, you and me were like, well, they talked about, you can have the pond, but you can't, for your interpretation is you can't have swales that would go to the pond. That would be considered the fossés, which are ditches, right? The word fossé technically translates to the word ditch. That being said, I'm like, but what if we're making them? Like, what if we're making ditches in a way of moving water on the property, doing a kind of water management, which is a huge part of farming, by the way.
Of course.
Where we're going to plant certain things that like water near the ditches, and we're going to make these man-made ditches, which we don't call ditches because they're not on the side of a road necessarily. They're not necessarily, they're swales that are part of permacultural design. They're part of designing a farm in a way that is managing water, the most important resource that all farms need and need to manage. So even in their answer, we couldn't even it's like it all kind of boils
open
down
to interpretation.
Exactly. It all boils down to interpretation, and that's what I've learned, and I see it as actually an empowering perspective, is because everything is open to interpretation. Well, that creates a pretty interesting gray zone, right? That creates a bit of a Venn diagram, and you don't have to implicate yourself in this, but I'll implicate myself in this. Is I'm willing to push the boundaries of those things and then ask questions and say, okay, well, where does the farming start and agritourism begin? Because they don't see agritourism as a farming activity.
What's a tiny house?
Yeah, what's
a mobile house?
What's the definition of a mobile home? So it said, hey, you're allowed to have 3 mobile homes on the property while you're building your farm and for temporary workers and different things, as well as when you're applying for building a house. But because ours are buses, and they had a bylaw that says, well, we don't want buses. We don't want people living in buses in people's driveways in the middle of the city. That makes sense. But on a farm, well, now what? And then they say, okay, well, the law says mobile home. I said, okay, well, a bus is a mobile home. Then I checked the Office de la langue française, and I read the definition from the official Quebec government definition of a mobile home, and everything that their definition said was basically perfect for the definition of a mobile home. So with a bus. So back to the gray zones. It's like, I think that as an entrepreneur, as a farmer, I have a choice. Do I lean in and like just go for it? Or do I like cower and just like wait for approvals? If I had waited for approvals, and every farmer told me this, they're like, just dig the pond. If they're mad about it, they'll give you a fine, pay it. It'll cost you less time and money than going through the process. Every freaking farmer told me that.
Right.
And I still said, no, I'm going to wait. I'm building a relationship with these people. I'm going to wait. And then I just decided, I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go. And then all of a sudden they sent us the answer, which still was vague, but I was just like, that's good enough.
Right,
go.
right.
But it is really a dance. And and there's no clear direction, and there's no clear person who's deciding. And then the interpretation not only happens on the side of, let's say, the farmer or the master planner and kind of the architect in this case, but then it also falls onto like, who's at the city? Who at the city believes that, yes, you should do this, or no, you shouldn't do that, right? Like when I applied to build the house, they're like, no, your farm's not big enough to build a house and it can't generate enough revenue. I'm like, yeah, but why? Like in what way? Like we are generating revenue. Here's the proof. Here's the thing. Here are other farms that are doing the same. And then we had to find the case studies and all that stuff. JM, blah, 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 bring an a bunch of stuff. But from their perspective, they're looking at it as like, oh, well, you know, corn and soy farms couldn't be profitable on a piece of land this big.
Mm-hmm.
And back to and even when we submitted things, they're like, oh, but all the revenue has to be on this one piece of property because even though you're farming all of these different things, you're asking for it on this one piece of property.
Right.
But none of these things are written anywhere. Like they're all written between the lines.
Yeah,
of the
it
law.
feels like it's their kind of their own interpretation of their own laws at some point.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they also have some the history shows, you know, like jurisprudence. Like I guess there's some legals. Let's say
Precedents.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. But yeah, and what you bring at the table is very interesting also, because on a broader perspective, it boils down to the question of what is agriculture, as you mentioned, and how can community live within agriculture, you know, and you know, if you want to support a community, it needs different things than just agriculture will need by itself.
Yes.
And I think this is the element I'm really interested about in that farm also. Say, although we try to go through, you know, the actual regulation and try we're doing our best to move forward. I think one of the trickiest question and one of the biggest challenge we have is also, okay, so how do we bring communal spaces which support the community but are not 100% dedicated to agriculture, but to the people who support the architecture, the agriculture, sorry. And so this is another gray zone. I think this is one of the biggest gray zone we have because yes, we have like those technical gray zones about the pond, about the street, about, you know, like those little things you need to make your farm bigger. But like on a bigger perspective, like how do we support the wellness of the people on the farm?
Yes.
Like, yeah, all those questions also. And then if we were sitting at the city tables right now and asking that question, like they would be like, well, I guess, I don't know.
They don't have an answer.
No, they don't.
Whatever answer they're going to give is basically an interpretation and they're trying to cover their ass and not give you an answer that's false.
Or if they play the good guys, maybe they will tell you, well, the law says that, but it doesn't say this. So maybe, I mean, I'm not suggesting I think they're conscious of the gray zone themselves, right?
Yes.
And so sometimes the way they talk, it's just, well, so that's what we have. This is what's clear. Go with that and do your best as well. I don't know. It's like, yeah.
That's basically what every meeting with the city to some degree ends up being is like, well, here's like some of the general lines and here's some of the slightly more specific lines and maybe we'll follow up with you later, and later could be like in weeks, months down the line. But they themselves don't necessarily have the answers. And then it kind of goes back to like some level of common sense and a level of, and this is what I learned being the son of a lawyer, is like, is everything defendable? Am I acting in good faith? Are they acting in good faith? And is it reasonable that I interpreted what I read, that I did the research, that I read it, that I tried to do my best possible case to do the thing that was correct? So I never said yes to houses or things on the farm that were immovable. Meaning, even a maison mobile, like is a yurt, for example, a maison mobile, like a Mongolian yurt as an example. Well, technically, the Mongolians literally use them as mobile homes.
Of course.
But how mobile is that? Well, I said, okay, I'm going to interpret mobile home as being, if it's on wheels, if you can put a key in it and drive it away, or hitch it to a truck and drive it away, well, then that's a mobile home. Right? So this idea of this dance is the thing that I think that this conversation is particularly highlighting, is that like what I've learned is not necessarily more about the laws, although we definitely learned quite a bit more about that. But what I've learned is that my job at this point as let's say a lead designer or master planner of the farm alongside you is how much risk do I want to take? How much tolerance do I have? And how much can I back my decision making with either some jurisprudence, aka people who have done decisions that have been made in the past, and then also some level of just like innovation, just saying like, you know what, nobody's done this before, forget it, we're going,
Right.
and just pioneering. And all the cities that have existed came from that. Like the idea of urban started as rural. Cities, like the city of Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, which is technically the agglomeration that we're part of, the city that we're part of, that started as a village.
Of course,
That started as a farms. That started and grew over time into all of this. So aren't we doing the exact same thing? Like, isn't Valhalla another way of thinking that, like, hey, we've got a little city center and we're slowly but surely developing. We're starting with farming and infrastructure. But the more that we get there, the more that those laws start to happen. But what I found particularly fascinating was that all of a sudden, the old way of life that I work the land, I just want to build a house on my farm, and then I want to employ a bunch of other people, and eventually they're going to do well enough that they can build their house, and then all of a sudden the city and the village grows into a suburb, or then it grows into a city or whatever it is. Like that process was now all of a sudden like becoming illegal. It's almost like it feels like I've interpreted that process.
Yeah, but you know why? You know why? You know what I mean? Like at some point, if I put myself in their shoes, like I understand the reasons, and we can share with the audience here, is because some people use that first right of building a house on the farm, on the land you're farming, to actually just sell the house back and to someone who's not doing farming, and then so what happens is you lose that piece of land from the old Quebec territory of farming, and so there's less and less and less. Farmlands then.
Yes.
So it turns back to, I agree with you. Like this is like a very first. How would you say that? Like it's a droit essentiel. Like it's a primary right you should have.
Yeah.
But then you need to show the government and the municipality, and that's an interesting thing also for people who are listening. So basically, you need to have the municipality on your side.
Yes, they have to agree first.
And then you go to the MRC with the municipality, or the municipality goes for you to the MRC to convince them that you are in the position where you have the right to do your house, let's say. And the MRC is going to knock at the door of CPTAQ to actually deposit the full
in a weird way, but you're also it's submitted to a person online. And then this person who's making a decision is one person at the end of the day who gets your case, who has never seen the farm, never visited the farm, knows nothing about the farm, never calls you, never asks you a question. All they do is say, can you send me more documentation? And then based on jurisprudence, based on just like these calculations that are completely vague, they give you like a yes or no.
Right.
And it's like a court decision, but without any capacity to have like a real conversation
discussion around. Yeah.
Like, and I just find that piece, the dehumanizing piece of it, the fact that they never visit the farm, the fact that they whatever, like that inherently can't be the right way. I think, like, I agree with you that I understand that there are developers that would use this loophole to kind of make developments happen and do different things. Okay, I hear you. But man, I've been on this farm for 11 years. And to just have somebody say, hey, by the way, your farm is not viable, sitting in a completely different city, never having seen the farm, knowing nothing about the farm, never having called or spoken to me, knowing nothing about me, inherently feels also like it's not necessarily the right process. And so somewhere in there's like this middle ground that needs to come forward. And the one beautiful thing I could say is that every stride that Valhalla makes in this direction becomes the jurisprudence of tomorrow.
Probably. But this is an interesting discussion also I would like to open with you, because I kind of feel like, we do feel like we're pioneers, like opening up this kind of community farming model and all that. But it feels also to me that I kind of feel like there's many, many other underground projects going on.
Yes.
And which are just not, don't have much visibility as much as yours have, because you're a storyteller, you're an entrepreneur, you bringing a lot of people from the outside. Let's say you bring a lot of people from the city to the farm, and then from the farm back to the city, and the word spreads, and so your farm is getting a lot of visibility.
I call it our farm.
Our farm. Our farm. Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, so I don't know. It's I guess that there's more.
We have a unique
I think there are there are more people than we think that went through some sort of those processes.
Oh, 100%.
But they just didn't document it.
They've never done it publicly.
Exactly.
The way we're doing it publicly and having the discussion even that I had with JM on the last episode, which I encourage people to listen to if they didn't, but also in this way where I'm a different kind of farmer because I had a different type of skill set and career before as I transitioned into more and more farming.
Exactly.
That now brings me to have a unique skill set that back to where does farming start and end? Well, if I'm doing marketing for the farm and I'm making these documents for the farm, and if I'm doing, accounting for the farm, all of those things, although all for the farm, aren't part of farming. And yet many farmers have a bunch of people who go out into the fields and do almost none of the project. They're just doing the payroll and the different thing, but they're a farm manager. Mm-hmm. So at what point are you a farm manager? At what point are you a farmer? At what point are you this? And those lines are just so gray. And if I have if we're victim, and I'm going to say the word victim just because we're blessed with it. I see it as a blessing. But that a bunch of people come to our farm and want to ask questions and want to ask a tour, and because our farm looks cool or has a different vibe than most farms, now all of a sudden they want a tour. Well, not last year at this time that was illegal. We're not allowed to give people a tour of the farm, at least on an official basis.
Right.
That doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Like if somebody comes and wants to buy our strawberries or buy our garlic or buy our whatever, and they have questions about it, why am I not going to answer them? Or why am I not going to give them a tour? And I think that it's back to the old model, or I say the industrial model of farming got away from something that is lifestyle based and necessity based and became this mechanized machine of output that says
100%.
What tour do you need? Like, hey, look out into the field. You could see 100 kilometers away. It's an exaggeration, but you can see very, very far, and it's all strawberries or it's all corn or it's all this. So the tour is like 5 seconds because I just get it. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Here's their barn, here's their machine, here's their thing, and you're farming this one thing. But in our case, it's just not at all the way it works. Like we have flowers and fruit bushes and trees and this and chickens and pigs and blah, blah, blah. And they're all integrated into an ecosystem that inherently is significantly more interesting from the perspective of people who are visiting.
Exactly.
And,
for sure.
And so planning things around the lifestyle of farms and farmers and the people who are implicated at farms, including farm workers, let's say, even if they don't necessarily own the farm, they're not necessarily entrepreneur, is an important part, again, of this ecosystem of farming. And we're butting up against this, right? Like we're now in the conversation, we're in the planning phases of what we call an ecological sanctuary, which inherently is a place that we are farming in a more permaculture and market gardening kind of way, a mix of both. But we also plan on doing tours. We also plan on hosting events. We also plan on doing education.
Exactly.
But we also plan on doing health and wellness, right? I mean, we talk about, I think it's, where is it in this document? These are the three elements that we want to bring forward here, right? Valorisation is a translation for promoting farming as a whole, promoting the idea of farming and not only from a job perspective, but also the different components. Diffusion is then talking about, well, not only how do we promote it, but then how do we teach it? Like if we're going to have more farmers, and we talked about this with JM, there are very few farmers under the age of 35 in Quebec, and they were actually half of what there used to be 20 years ago. The average age of farmers 54, blah, 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 blah. Well, we need more freaking education, and we need education that happens on the farm, not in a classroom. Because we could talk all day about the theory of farming, but if you don't do it in the reality, it's the math is very easy to do. The making the math work physically is very hard to do. And I think this last piece that we're choosing to be a little bit quieter about, at least when in certain discussions with the city, but not so quiet right now, is where does connection come in? Where does residencies come in? Where does somebody who's doing a farm stage come in, right? If I'm a company and I want to have workers participate in a stage where we might eventually hire them later, well, that happens in corporate America all the time, or corporate whatever Canada. If you're a law firm, you do a law stage. If you're whatever, well,
architects do it.
Architects do it. Every everybody does it. What about farms? And if they're going to come and do a stage, and they're going to wake up first thing in the morning and go to bed, at sunset, wake up at sunrise and go to bed at sunset. Well, now we need infrastructure that goes beyond just washing of the vegetables. What about washing of their dishes? What about where do they take a shower? What about where do they go to the bathroom? What about, you know what I mean? Like, where do they just hang out? You know, like sometimes it's noon and it's high sun. We're not going to be out in the middle of the field wasting our energy and getting zapped by the sun. We're going to go retreat and hide for a minute and then go back out when, the temperatures are a little bit more reasonable. And so all of these things, as well as the mental health and wellness of farmers, which is a huge problem, particularly, you hear about it in India, but it's a real problem here too. That's where the edge of what we're doing is now.
Right.
How do you, you're an active part of the planning of this ecological sanctuary, which is just to give people context, excuse me, of where that's happening. So this is kind of a bit of an overhead view of, I want to say about like 10 acres of the farm itself, an 88-acre farm. So we've got this street here in the middle. We call this the north lot. This is the south lot because that's where they are physically or cardinally. What we're talking about is this back portion over here. It is about a 2.5-ish acre space that generally has been underused. I mean, it's never really been farmed as corn and soya. We have a horse farm behind us here where, there's a big pile of horse manure that has been, now spread and turned into garden beds and different things here in the back. But for 30 years, it was just accumulating on our property in that way. What is it? How do we go about planning something like this? And by the way, we do have some buildings here that are not present on the farm. These are aspirational, non-necessarily, like this is undesigned building. This is an undesigned building at this moment, but it's trying to paint the future today so that we can plan everything that is happening at the farm structurally to not get in each other's way. Because we've done that poorly in the past. Like we literally had to physically move. We've moved 2 buildings in the history of the farm. Physically lifted the building and moved the building twice.
Yeah.
Because
so this is something you can avoid when you plan something like that. And I just last weekend we were at the farm and you were doing this meeting with most of the workers at the farm, and we were like, you were planning this building, this technical building where we have no electricity coming in, and you have a well not so far away, so it's a water point, it's an energy point, and just, but like this building is in the middle of, it's right there, so it's in the, okay, so agrotourism is planned to go there. You need like vehicle circulation around it. There's a workshop coming up in that zone as well. So like just to plan ahead, as you mentioned, like so it gives you the conditions or like the constraints you need to respect before moving too fast.
Yes.
So yeah, so but then back to the sanctuary, I guess you because you were introducing this piece of the land, and of course it feels to me like this. So basically, this piece of the land is not as accessible as the rest of the land because you cannot really get there by vehicle.
Yes.
You need to park your car somewhere there and go over the stream and go in this place where, to me, it feels more like forest than it feels like
than farm.
And that's why, like the first time I went there, I saw this is where should go the sanctuary.
Yes.
And this is where we could take refuge, or this is where we can just take a step back from farming at some point, and connect with nature in a bigger view,
Yep.
And this is and I think this is what brought us together, is the vision for that.
Yes.
Mostly is the vision for that kind of space and how we design that space and what are the services that will support the community as well. Because yes, there's business aspect of education, like agrotourism. You mentioned like garden marketing, market garden,
yeah.
But there's also like all the flowers industry that is interesting for us. And so, but how does that mixed with the human? I kind of see like this is where, because Valhalla is growing food, is growing community, but this is for me the heart of the human aspect of the farm,
Yes.
the sanctuary.
Yep.
And
Well, the connection component both to nature, but also to each other.
Exactly.
I mean, if we're going to have a farm team that's going to be well coordinated, and that's like the most important thing, is that the people who are working together understand one another, communicating well with one another, respect and hear one another. I mean, is doing an event that makes people come together, is doing an event that attracts people to the farm who actually buy products, is doing an event where, all the farm workers are going to, come together and just chat and stretch and, make sure that they're feeling well physically, so that they can go out into the field and do all that work. And that they feel heard emotionally, or, it's like all of those things are, to me, part of the farm.
Of course. And it's not just, because the definition of agritourism is something that is related to to farming, and that promotes the product of farming and the actual occupation, like being a farmer. But
also in a milieu agricole, in a farm setting.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, as mentioned, of course.
So that's,
of course, everything you mentioned for me is fully part of agriculture. It's not like just. It's like is a foundation the base of a house? Like, could you have a house without this concrete foundation? Yes, you could, because it could be a pillar or something. But you need something solid that supports the rest.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like this is, and it's like doing things upside down, meaning like we're starting from the end. Well, maybe not, but what I'm trying to create as an image here is that.
What's a chicken and an egg scenario?
Yeah.
Which one do you have to do first, right? Like, from us to build the farm, we need to attract talent. We need to bring people. We need people to buy our products. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, you have to grow it first. Okay, but by just focusing on growing it, now we're not doing any of the work that actually attracts people to potentially come and buy it, and to attract the talent that, in this particular case, is attracted to this type of idea. I didn't grow up on a farm. I learned farming. I started learning farming 11 years ago. I'm still learning farming today. But the idea of it's chicken and the egg. Like, once you have more people, then you need more infrastructure. Well, to make more infrastructure, you have to grow more food. But to grow more food, you need more infrastructure. So it's like it's
kind of a
constant
spiral
loop. Yeah, it's like a yin yang kind of scenario, or a little bit of a spiral dynamic. But one has to support or grow with the other naturally. However, the way I see it is, at least the way I interpret the law from their perspective, not from my perspective, from their perspective is, no, it has to be agriculture, and agritourism is an afterthought. And then it's like, well, is that really serving us? Because we're seeing more and more farms are doing direct sales. Pandemic definitely supported that. We're seeing more and more people wanting to go directly to their farm and directly to the source and learning from their farmers. We were seeing more and more need for people wanting to do educational tours or take courses both online and in person. We're seeing more and more people wanting to volunteer just because they're excited about whatever it is about the farm. And all of those things fall under the support of the farm through things like agritourism, but that inherently both, to me, are super connected. Now, in certain cases where the tourism is much lower, because we are a farm that's 20 minutes away from the downtown core, and now 5 minutes away from basically a metro station, that is about literally days away from opening. Inherently, we are in a position where, of course, we're attracting more tourism. And therefore, of course, and we also have neighbors literally right next door. Everyone has neighbors, but their houses literally see our farm, and it's not like suburbia next to our farm. Then inherently, we're going to be under a different kind of scrutiny and a different kind of scenario that makes all of this stuff way more challenging.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think it goes back to the core of our discussion, or one of the cores of our discussion, which is interpretation. Right? Is doing yoga on a farm agritourism? To me, it is. Is doing education for children part of farming? Well, some could say maybe not. Well, am I teaching kids how plants grow? Am I walking them through things? Am I teaching them how to feed the chickens and quash the eggs? At what point does that become farming, and at what point does it not?
Right. I guess the discussion should be more around, as long as you grow food, maybe there's a level to be calculated, but as long as you grow food,
Sure.
everything that is related to farming and community that supports the farm should be just totally open.
Yes.
And then you mentioned neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So of course, there's a need for a good relationship between what happens at the farm and who lives around.
Yes.
And of course, in a near future, everyone that owns a house in the suburban area, but just next door from a farm, hopefully would be open-minded to see new kind of communities grow up in their backyard.
Yes.
And
that wasn't far from the case in at least the beginning years of what we were doing, because we didn't have as much resource. We weren't as coordinated, and our soil just wasn't there. You know, I spoke to a neighbor for basically the first time. I never really met this neighbor other than this past weekend. And she came by and was like, okay, wow, you guys are really kind of moving the needle. At first we were really concerned, and now it's getting better, and we're really excited about it and the direction, and you guys are growing a lot of this. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe I'll come and, grab some stuff. It's amazing how it took 11 years for them to finally come and approach us and be like, guys.
Did you ask this person what were her concerns?
I did. Yeah, I did. I spoke a little bit about their concerns. I mean, I think the primary concern is just generally noise. People are concerned about. I think people are really happy that they're not getting sprayed in their backyard anymore.
Right.
That there's no chemicals that are being sprayed directly behind their own houses. Her other concern was she's like, oh, the fossé or the ditch is on your side, on your lot, on your property, and we're having a little bit of drainage issues. And I was like, okay, so you're asking me to come and dig the ditch for you? You know what I mean? And he said, and it's a bit of a gray zone, because it's well, now I have to deal with your water on my property just because you made your property drain to my property, and now you're saying it's my problem. So it's these are neighbor problems, right?
Right.
But these happen in suburbia too, right, or in cities. But it wasn't confrontational conversation at all. It was more we're dealing with these different things, and then the neighbor next door did some aménagement that made their water come to our property, so now we're having problems here. So now we have to deal with it was all of that was kind of coming through. But I think the good thing that I think is now in a very good way unfolding for the farm is that it has become a discussion. It has become an actual line of communication rather than judgment from one side and then judgment from the other side,
which is a good thing.
And yeah, absolutely. And I look, at the end of the day, our goal is to be able to feed those families, and they don't have to buy from us, they don't have to whatever, but from a vision perspective, our goal is to be able to feed and support 150 people, right? At for all needs, power, water, food. So, that's a fairly interesting vision. And rather than focusing on our goal is to make the most amount of money and produce the most amount of food that makes the most amount of money, our goal is to produce, yes, an enormous amount of food. And we believe that the money is there if you support somebody, in those different ways. But I'm not just seeing us farming just the plants. The power that we use. We recently installed solar panels on the farm. We had already had a solar bank that was the power source for us for 8 or 9 years. But for the first 8 or 9 years, and it wasn't there the first year, but whatever. But long story short, we got the power online, the solar panels online, they're feeding the grid. We were able to reduce our energy consumption by at least 50%. And, some days by 75%, other days when it's raining, a little less, but on average, at least 50%. Is that not, again, part of the thing that we need to be doing, that everyone should be doing? I mean, we talk about climate change. We talk about the impact of farms have on climate, blah, 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 blah. It's and here we are doing the thing that is restoring the carbon in the soil, restoring more and more trees that literally sequester carbon, that is feeding people, and it is doing it in a at least almost net zero type, scenario, or as much as possible. And if anything, we're a carbon sink. We are sequestering carbon.
Why? Yeah.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, the government policy on a federal level would be yeah, let's support these people. But then there's such gray zone in everything around this that it's actually incredibly challenging to move forward. it's paralyzing if you don't have a risk tolerance. Essentially, if you're not just willing to say, I'm going to throw my ass on the line and I can get shut down tomorrow or whatever, or this project can get denied, or they can ask me to fill back in the pond that I just dug, or blah, 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 blah. But my experience is that if you're doing it with goodwill and you're moving in the right direction, that inherently, yes, you should inform yourself as much as possible. You should plan. This is what I recommend. That people should hire people like you to plan and to do these different things, and really focus on what are the needs and the overarching vision of the farm. That makes an enormous amount of sense. People need mentorship in farming and need mentorship in planning of farms, and designs and community and houses and everything. But it is an absolutely... there's no specific answer to a lot of things. At least that's my experience.
Yeah. I was just listening to you, and I had a few ideas coming up in my mind. And one is like, and we never discussed that. It's just like a new idea I have. That, so we were talking about educational aspect and showing people how to farm or how to take care of the land, and for adult or children, whatever. But what about educating public to? Well, this is what we knew in new farms. This is what we do on small scale regenerative farms. So because the thing is, the cities will apply the laws because they receive like you have a neighbor who calls. Let's imagine a scenario. Your farm is perfect. It's ecological. It's regenerative. It creates work, autosufficiency, all that. Like it's perfect. Like it's in the right direction. But because you do one harvest party one day, you have one neighbor that calls the city, and then the city's after you. Yeah. And then they try to catch you on small little things that nobody care. Like we're just doing we're having a super nice farm model. Yeah. And so I think what we could also focus a little bit on trying to educate the public, so they understand what we do
as much as possible. I mean, I think that's what we're literally doing right now by trying to record this podcast and having people like a JM or like you on the conversation, even my own perspective and my learnings and lessons that I've accumulated over the last 11 years. That inherently is part of it. But where I bump up into problems is I have the skill set of building an academy and building an online school and a course, and that would teach all of these different things. The problem is that the more time I spend doing that, the less time now I start being less of a farmer from their perspective. So now I have to put the resources here and then the resources there and then the resources here and the resources there. And I can't just like be like, oh, okay, we built the farm, it's growing really well. Okay, let me pause, let me stop growing over here and let me start growing over here. And then this is going to support that and that's going to support this. They just don't see that. They just aren't entrepreneurs.
Right.
And their interpretation is like, nope, this is the exact word in this exact box with this exact thing. And everyone that we spoke to, like when we through this conversation with the city and the CPTQ and all these different things, we hired a lawyer, we hired an expert in all things relations to farm development and different components like that. They all kind of said, they were all kind of defeated. They're like, it's never going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, that's your interpretation. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, but that was my whole, I was like, that's exactly why I'm doing it. Like that, like now you're just feel like, oh, it's never going to happen. Just watch me.
Right.
And I think that's more than just what we grow. I think that's and this is why we call it the Valhalla Movement Podcast. Valhalla is a farm that is a model that is part of what I consider to be a larger movement that we are trying to grow. Mm-hmm. And I don't think look, we are not at all the best farm. We're not the best farmers, but damn, we're pretty good at farming and we're pretty good at community and we're pretty good at storytelling. And that's pretty unique as a farm.
Right.
And the combination of those things we're world class at. And that's where my hope is that the work that we're doing with the house, with the farm, with the transformation center, with even greenhouses, like testing things like, hey, let's try and make a tropical greenhouse and grow some stuff in a very interesting way, or let's try and scale this one product to a massive scale, but doing it all by hand rather than big machinery. Let's try and build buildings that have agricultural use, but also communal use. Like all of those different things are part of the thing that needs to happen in the world of farming. That there's a reason why no under 35-year-olds are doing it. It's number one, it's fucking hard. Number two, it's incredibly expensive. And number three, they're just not exposed to it. They have no way of educating themselves, and they have no way of seeing that it's cool. Like they just don't, it's not the thing that most people can do on TikTok. And yet the people who are doing it on TikTok, some people like grow massive brands because of it. You know, JM, I think, is an example of that. Like, launched an online school, launched a book, launched a couple things that blew up his whole career. I mean, otherwise, he was just a normal guy farming a small piece of land. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and there's thousands of those people, but
he's a successful one, though.
He's a successful
He shows that, he's actually the proof that the model can change.
Yes, but it's because of his work that he was able to do the farming and then eventually document what he did and be popular enough and you know, in my opinion, be at the perfect intersect of Quebec culture that wants to promote Quebec and French-speaking people, that inherently had the perfect storm of things that made that happen. And my truth is, and he said it himself, he's like, Mark, you're kind of like that next wave of that. Like you're doing the same thing. And I kind of recognize that. I appreciate his sentiment about that. But like, yeah, that is the next step. We do need to educate the public. And the reality is the public just doesn't fully understand.
I think if we want tolerance from the public to something they don't understand, we need to educate them. Everything you mentioned, you just like, this is why we're doing things differently. This is why we're going that direction. And if you don't understand, please tolerate.
Campaign.
Yeah, I know. But
like if I have to farm, it's like, oh, here, by the way, this is why we dug the pond, and this is why we have wood chips, and this is why we collected all this wood. It's like, if every time I had to go to my neighbor and tell him everything I'm doing, I would never be farming. I'd be doing a political campaign. Like,
right.
So, and that back to, you have to be an amazing entrepreneur. You have to be able to and market your product and get people excited and get people to understand your brand and your story. You have to be an amazing farmer. And then, in my opinion, you have to be an amazing kind of legal/politician. Because none of this makes sense without you understanding mass amounts of, like, there are mass subsidies and mass grants and mass challenges that come on the legal and political front that are drastically shifting and changing farming. And we see that. Netherlands. Okay, the Netherlands is one of the smallest countries in the world, but they produce the second most amount of food per capita on the planet. They literally produce, they're only behind the United States in pounds of food that they produce. Okay. Wow. They have a massive political movement that's going on where they're saying, hey, you're not allowed to use these fertilizers. You have to cut back on these different things because CO2 gases, like or methane gas or whatever it is, climate change. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second. Like, if you cut all these different things, you're going to fail the farms. You're going to fail one of the biggest pieces of the economy, the biggest exportation things out of the Netherlands, all for their way of trying to cut back climate change. But in my opinion, climate change is solved on the farm. We should be supporting these farmers. And one policy shift completely makes or breaks or ruins their business. All the dairy farmers in Quebec, for example, Quebec is one of the biggest dairy producers in the world. All the dairy farmers in Quebec are beholden to the fact that we have a minimum price for the milk. And they actually make people waste the milk.
Oh, wow.
Because there's quotas and different things that say you cannot have this or you cannot have that. And the government is there steering the wheel, trying to market make rather than letting the market make itself.
Right.
And so that's a bit of a political philosophy question. Are you more conservative or, let's say, right-leaning, where less government is better? More, let's say the extreme of that would be libertarian. Or are you more government is good and government helps and it can put in place policies and grants and things that help farmers? And the answer is it's kind of a bit of both. You know, I don't know if they're making the market or if they're breaking the market, but all of it is confusing. I think that's just where I end. You know what I mean? It's all really confusing. It's impossible to kind of know how to navigate in certain moments, but we're doing our best.
We're doing our best.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Any last words that you would have to share? I mean, anything you're excited about when working on the farm? Anything that's alive for you?
Well, I'm definitely excited about talking on the working on the sanctuary, ecological sanctuary. This is going to be a big chunk of the farm. Hopefully, it's gonna go fast.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we're gonna be able to welcome more people at the farm and have more members. And otherwise, thank you for welcoming me here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great discussion. I kind of feel like I just like to see how motivated you are to push forward and go through the cracks and try to push things further. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me.
There's a lot. I think we're going to do a follow-up episode at some point for sure. When we're going to show you a little bit more of the designs of some of the buildings that we're planning. I think I would love to do more where we reveal where we really walk through even why did we do this in this section of the farm, or why are we doing that, or I'll give it another example actually real fast. I'm going to go back to, I think it's this document here. As an example, we have garlic beds and we have a pond over here. Well, why did we put the pond here? We have designs for a vineyard, and why did we have this much space for vineyard? Why did we put the fruit trees over there? Why did we keep a kind of a pathway in the middle? There's so many decisions that are hidden in the farm design that I think that we need more time to cover in a future episode. So super excited for us to continue working together. You're a life changer, bro. I really appreciate you. Thank you for being a guest. And for those of you who are made it here, please leave your comments in the description. I know we touched on a lot, but we're doing our best to try and support sharing our story, but also supporting how you can do some of this in your own neighborhood, or your own farm, your own life, and your own community. So if you got here, please hit the like button, hit the comment button, all those different things. Hit the subscribe button, because we're trying to show you some value, and some validation for us is super valuable and super important. So see you in the next episode.